I was very fortunate enough to, around my middle of my teens, late teens, um, begin socializing with a lot of people that were in the arts, mostly in music. And I met um, a young Amy Winehouse at Sylvia Young's, and we became fast friends. And then she went on to Brits Academy. I went on to do mostly things that one shouldn't be doing.
Hello and welcome to the Isola podcast. Today we have an amazing guest for you. We have Icki, who has been an artist for over 20 years. His style has been described as post-digital minimalism. He's a Calgary contemporary alongside Andy Warhol, and he is a founding member of the Bloom Collective. Welcome, Icki.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, good to be here. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for coming. I'd like to start from the very beginning. Where are you from, and what brought you into the arts?
Oh goodness, the origin story. I always cringe when this question's asked because you never quite know how deep to go.
Deep as you want. Go as deep as you want.
Born, yeah, born and bred in London. Relatively normal upbringing in South London, but I was very fortunate enough to, around my middle of my teens, late teens, begin socializing with a lot of people that were in the arts, mostly in music. And I met a young Amy Winehouse at Sylvia Young's, and we became fast friends. And then she went on to Brits Academy. I went on to do mostly things that one shouldn't be doing, and didn't really know what I was going to do. And she ended up going in the music route and got a contract with Island. And I had reached out to her and said, "Can you get me some work?" I just need some work. And so from that, I managed to get some kind of work experience. Did a bit of kind of between kind of creative and art direction, kind of jumping around different areas, doing the whole typical work experience thing. And I kind of never left, and ended up doing a little bit of stuff on Frank, and then a much more significant role on Back to Black, and then kind of taking the aesthetic that she wanted and finding a way to kind of communicate that. In the case of Amy, it was that 1960s Saturday night dance show. Working with how those visuals will be experienced, not just from a branding perspective, but from a live setting. And I kind of operated in this kind of strange role that I kind of created for myself in between creative and art direction, and later into Universal through Island. Well, everything. Universal is like everything. Many other labels roll up into the monolith. And I did that for a long time, and then moved into, it's been 20 years since then, and I've kind of done so many different roles in that time. But I went into the live setting, 3D generalist work, lighting, graphics, that kind of stuff, and then kind of left that industry. Things got a bit heavy. A bit too heavy for me, and I was overindulgent, and so I did what I had to do, which was leave that space, take some time off, and I ended up working more in the traditional art domain, mostly in a consultancy capacity, actually, for kind of art funds and things like that, and talking about what art to invest in, and then. Alongside that was always doing my own stuff, because I was always very interested in display mediums, right? So installation in galleries and that kind of stuff. So I've always been a digital artist is the answer, but could never pursue that career because being an artist, a digital artist, was not as easy to do as being a traditional artist, simply because of this lack of provenance in digital work. It's kind of, I always take the audio example, you know, it's like when digital audio came around, look what happened, you know. A lot of the value in the physical asset was diminished, you know, and it's a little bit like that. And in the way that that's evolved, this has evolved. And yeah, so first time I came across NFTs, you know, that was kind of the exciting thing for me. It was like, you know, for the first time ever, I can be an artist, and I can do what I've always wanted to do, and I can actually have provenance, you know. And it was like, wow. So that was exciting. Yeah, that's kind of, I think that's kind of how the journey began.
Was your first introduction into Web3 and NFTs, was that through the sort of you know, the dominant chain? Was that through Ethereum? Were you ever you know, Bitcoin person or anything like that? What was it that really you know, drove you into this space?
Yeah, I had no interest in crypto. You know, I've dabbled in it as most people have, but I never really followed crypto. I came into Ethereum because initially I just thought it was a great way to make a lot of money. You know, I kind of, before, I mean, I jumped a step really, because I said, oh, then there was provenance and I realized I could be an artist. But before that, I just thought it was a really easy way to make money, because I just saw all these huge numbers, you know, and what people were selling for. And obviously with ignorance, you know, you look at what's selling. So I remember going onto OpenSea, you know, and seeing punks and seeing, you know, not understanding collectibles, and, you know, and kind of thinking that sells, you know, or seeing some 3D work and thinking I can absolutely, you know, I can do things 30 times better than this, you know, I'm going to make a fortune. So it was kind of, oh, well, where's all this stuff happening? Oh, it's on the Ethereum blockchain. Okay. Where's it being minted? Okay, there's OpenSea, and there's, you know, and later there was Foundation and Maker's Place and Super Rare and Known Origin. And so that was naturally the direction I went. But very quickly, this was kind of pre-Twitter Spaces. and that was the other thing, you know, I had no socials, you know, zero. I was very anti-social media from a very young age. I watched a documentary when I was younger called Terms and Conditions May Not Apply. And I became this kind of, you know, the anarchist in me was like, I'm not falling for this. So there's never any value in it. So I never had a Facebook account. Never did the, what's the work one, the LinkedIn. And I never did anything really. I had a Twitter account that I opened and I never used. But I had it up because occasionally I would make complaints to like my internet provider that the internet wasn't on. And it was a good way to get through to them. So that was like the only thing I had. And suddenly I realized that was kind of a necessity. And so through that, Twitter Spaces was really the thing, right? And from that, I learned very quickly, you know, about other chains and, you know, the wider kind of ecosystem and Web3 and what an NFT really was, you know. What metadata actually is, what the blockchain is, the difference between them, and why people are willing to pay, you know, these types of sums of money. So yeah, Ethereum is a short answer. That's how I landed on Ethereum. Yeah.
I want to just pivot a little bit and because I think it's a good pace to talk about Bloom. Would you mind explaining for the listeners and the viewers what is the Bloom Collective? Yeah,
no, that's a great question. What is it? Who knows? No, the Bloom Collective is a traditional art collective. So it was founded by myself and 9 other digital artists. In the same way that a lot of collectives over the years in art or communities in art were created to help drive certain art movements forward. So art history is very recursive, right? So, you know, the Impressionist movement did this. Everyone thought that Monet and Van Gogh was unfinished work, right? Because it didn't look like anything at the time, and no one wanted to exhibit them. So they formed these collectives that would help, you know, like-minded artists, creatives, drive that vision forward, be able to communicate it better, have more reach, and ultimately to host their own exhibitions. And that was really the birth of change in art, full stop. Right, every movement's isms and is nots, you know, minimalism, conceptualism, surrealism, all of these art movements were kind of based on this idea of collective thought. And it's a little bit like that, but the objective is a little different. So we have 10 artists who have very significant commercial careers. We all share that. So we've worked commercially for everybody. And I mean that. I mean, you know, you name it. Big brands, you know, the Nikes, the Vogues, the drinks brands, the car brands, that, you know, Google's, you know, we've done it all over the years. So we've got this kind of collective commercial experience, but we're all actually just trying to be artists. And what we're really interested in is bridging the gap between the traditional art domain and the digital art domain. And that's a complex problem to solve, because at the moment, if you look at it all comes down to this idea of a valuation model, right? So the way we value digital art, and ultimately how it will be valued in the future, and how we increase that buy side. You have the Web3 people who are looking at the technology and saying, how can we make it more accessible? How can we, you know, marketplaces and communities and all this stuff. But then there is this other piece of the puzzle that's really missing. And historically, it's come from the art community. And that is this: how do we engage with these people in the trad domain that are big lovers of art, big investors in art, whether it's at an institutional or a private, ultra high net worth level? And how do we get them to come and engage with it? You know, how do we give it credibility? And so that's what the Bloom Collective is all about. And we don't really aim to make profit. We have a community, sure, a Discord server and what have you. We are all independent artists. We occasionally collaborate because we trust each other. We love each other's work. We're very mixed medium. We have photographers, fashion, 3D, and illustration, etc. And we're also happy to consult, you know, and as you know, from a Web3 subject matter expertise capacity, but we don't push any of those services or products. It's really more just about building a brand around this idea of pushing forward that narrative and influencing the media narrative too, because it needs a little bit of work, you know. So that's really what the Bloom Collective is all about.
How are you going about that? And also, why is that important?
Yeah, it's important for artists because it's about market growth, right? And it's about credibility. Today, it's such a big open-ended question, so I'm trying to think how to structure this. Today, you have a marketplace, a digital Web3 marketplace, where, like I said, around 90%, if not more, of the collectors of digital art in the space are crypto native. Then you have to break that down again, and you have to say, within the NFT art use case, there is art that is classified as a collectible, and art that is, you know, has collectability. Yeah, and they're two different things, and the ontology matters, right? So you have art that is a collectible, which is part of a project, and I see that more as like raising money in an idea or a new business, or, you know, whereas art isn't the utility, the aesthetic isn't the utility, it's something else, and they use art as a mechanism to brand and bring some of the tokens to life, right? So it's more almost like fundraising, and that kind of looks more like typical tokenization within crypto. And that's a large part of the market, right? That's where a lot of the growth came from. It's exciting. It was new, huge profits to be made, etc. Within that, you've had these unique little experiments of real historic significance with art. There is a crossover. So an example of that is CryptoPunks, because they stood for something greater than, or the apes, you know, because they stood for something greater than. In the case of the apes, it was licensing, right? In the case of the punks, it was being the first, if you like, you know, on chain, to demonstrate the use case for art as metadata on a token that was not fungible on a blockchain, and how that all works. So if you consider all of that and you consider that market, what you've got is a valuation on this type of art that is basically not very sustainable, right? And it's just not. So the best way I can describe this is you have to consider the way traditional art has been valued over the years. And these aren't small sums of money, you know. I'm talking about the Rothkos and the, you know. So the way it's done in the traditional domain is there's lots of different ways of valuing art and valuation models. But in essence, the core of it is you look at, number one, authenticity, right? Because you have to make sure that what you're buying is the real deal. Then you look at the provenance. Where did that art come from? And that kind of goes with authenticity, which the digital use case has a really good answer for. And then it goes to kind of historic significance and price data. Primary sales, secondary sales, public spaces where the galleries that have exhibited it, you know, all of that stuff is what equals this valuation. But in the digital space, it's like, you know, someone buys Beeple every day for 69 million, and then it's like, well, that's the valuation, it's 69 million now, you know, and it just doesn't, that doesn't make any sense to anybody. You know, it's that typical buy and you know, demand and supply. You know, it's like, you know, if no one else is willing to pay 69 million, it's not worth 69 million. So you've got all of these weird mechanisms that you have to kind of manage. And what's valued in traditional is not valued yet in digital. For example, loaned provenance doesn't even exist in digital. In other words, if I exhibit the work with Andy Warhol at the Contemporary Calgary, like recently, some of the Bloomies did, from the Bloom Collective, where's that recorded on the token? You know, today it's not really. So that you're missing provenance, and more importantly, you're missing provenance that the crypto natives don't care about, but the traditionalists do. So this is a big disparity in how you value art, and so if you consider the entire pool of collectors in the crypto native space in digital art, it's very small, you know, relative to the traditional domain, really small. And so if you were to imagine an influx of traditional collectors coming in, that would really change things, right? Because they would no longer have the control, whether it's, I'm not talking about intentional wash trading, manipulating. I mean, sure, that stuff happens, right? But that's, you know, I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about generally, just basic economics. You know, these people come in, you've got a much larger group of people deciding on the value of something, and the error term, you know, the bit in the model that says this should be this price starts to shrink because you get more people, and therefore there's more consensus, and so it's harder to then debate. It's also really much harder to manipulate, right? It also becomes very obvious. So it would be a beneficial thing for everybody, and it doesn't mean that suddenly, you know, crypto native valuations will be non-existent, because there'll always be a subculture of that. I mean, meme art is a great example of that. You know, I think that's here forever, right? You know, and you know, collectibles are also very much the case. And depending on what collectibles do with Web2 brands like Tiffany's recently, right? That could be a very interesting dynamic as well. Yeah, so it's really important for artists that we bring in more buyers to meet the supply, right? Which is every single artist under the sun, right? That works digitally. And that we create integrity and credibility, because we don't have art critics, because it's Web3, right? And I don't necessarily want art critics. You know, I'd rather the market dictate where value is. But, you know, art valuation is very subjective, but it's also highly objective. And I think that's the bit that's missing. So what we aim to do is address, first of all, the issues, such as loan provenance on contracts, I'm talking to Manifold, I'm talking to Fast Tackle, we had a meeting with Manifold recently. But how can we address this problem? Where location and owner have to be the same thing. Well, no, they don't. You can still own something and the contract can take you out somewhere else, but the ownership stays the same, So these are the kind of little technical problems. Conservatorship is another one. What happens if it goes to a museum, and they want to have it in their permanent collection for hundreds of years? How does that work? Storage is another one. People think IPFS is forever, and it's not, not exactly. So, you've got these thought leaders like Artnode trying to solve that problem. And what's great about Web3 is you can just create the manifesto and put it out into the community, and then people can solve it if they think it's a good idea, So that's what's really kind of cool about it. But it's super important, and it involves a lot of discussion with kind of traditional galleries and museums and critics in some respect, and media, because there's a lot of education that needs to happen, and it's very difficult to do.
How do you feel about AI art?
It's quite a profound question, isn't it? First of all, AI art is as a medium, is broad, and I don't think many people realize that. So when you talk about art driven by certain algorithms, depending on what you're doing. So for example, one form is GAN, right, where you feed lots of images into an algorithm and you train that algorithm to understand and recognize those images. It's incredibly complicated to do well. It involves writing your own code, your own scripts, finding all the source images, feeding it. It's certainly not a computer. The computer is doing the final output, but you create. It's like saying an oven can cook you 5-star meals. Well, sure, you just put things in it and it warms them up and it cooks them. But if you don't prepare everything first, it doesn't give you anything. So that's GAN, and then there is now becoming quite popular this Mid-Journey DALL-E 2, which is word-based AI, which has a large repository of images that it calls upon, and then uses the word prompts to create. But that's just a tool, and I think the craze was that you could democratize it to a certain point, at which it looks really good and everyone's really impressed, and then very quickly people get bored and they start saying, well, that just looks like your typical AI art, because it does. It has a look, it has a sheen, it has a type of vibe. And so you get people that then use those images and overpaint and use other techniques to bring it to life. Innovators like Claire Silver, and they really stand out. These, Deconstruct's another one. There are people that write their own scripts and algorithms. So for me, AI art is just a tool, and I think it democratizes art as much as it can be a wonderful tool for people that were never able to create something quite like that. They didn't have maybe the technical skills, and I think that's beautiful, and I endorse that 100%. I'm not fearful of it. Just because an artist can paint really well doesn't make them the same as the next artist that can paint really well. Art is about speaking, and I think that's the point, right? When you look at the birth of the crypto native valuation, I'm talking about the average Joe that doesn't really understand how art is viewed and the history of art. Then they might just look at what's really shiny and cool looking, which is kind of the same approach you take to buying art for your home, right? It's kind of very subjective. It's like, I just like this. I don't care what the critic says about it. I just like it, and I want it in my home. And that's lovely. But if you're looking at valuations, if you're looking at investment of art, I think very quickly, people that just use the very simple approach to those tools, classic Word without much long, not long strings, not their own work, no post-production, are going to get lost very quickly, and I'm not concerned about it at all. I think it's a really healthy change. It's something that you can't stop. I think it will be very interesting what happens over the future years, because today a lot of the art that it uses, that AI uses and learns from, is art that was produced by a person. But how will that look when it starts to reference art produced by a machine? And it muddies the water. Then what will it look like? It's a very interesting experiment, and I'm excited about it. I work in experience. I work in thinking about how my work will be experienced, whether that's on a 20-foot screen projected onto a building, in an installation, on a phone, and depending on that, and depending on what I'm trying to say, I will create something that works in that way. Conceptual art doesn't care about the look of art at all. It cares about the story, the thought about the work. That Maurizio Catalan's Comedian, for example, the classic picture of a banana stuck to a wall, right? That's a great example of conceptual art that we all kind of can reference. It's not about how good the banana looks, right? It's about something far more significant in that movement of art. So you can't help but think, so what if a computer is more accessible by more people and democratizes art to a certain standard? It's just another tool, and great artists will leverage that tool and create even greater art with it. That's always the way it's been. The digital camera, people used to talk about that changing the photography game. It hasn't. It's been a huge value add technology and change. You no longer had to produce film, and there was an art in producing film. So the video camera, another one, and it goes on and on and on. So I think it's a very interesting debate. In terms of copyright, there are going to be questions asked about where the algorithm for certain AI tools like Midjourney or DALL-E, what they're referencing. You would suspect that they're referencing public domain, which there is plenty of, right? Let's not forget that everything becomes public domain eventually. If an artist passes away approximately 75 years later, it's public domain. Does that change much? Not really. That's why the argument for CCO is so strong. Vincent van Gogh, original Vincent van Gogh is copyright free. I can use that work. I can share it. I can do whatever I want with it. Take a photo, print it, put it up on my wall, whatever. Copy it exactly. Try and sell it again exactly as it looks. I can do that. There's no problem. But that doesn't change the value of the original. And that's the thing. If you're established as an artist and brand, copyright doesn't actually mean much. So it's really more just a protection, I think, for work when in artists in their infancy, or middle of their journey, before they've attributed a brand to the style of work that they have or their creativity. And I think that's applicable in all areas, with the exception of innovation, where I think then there's IP that needs to be protected.
I just wanted to wrap around back to something you said earlier about the experience of art. That's something that you're focused on. And so I'd like to pull up, if you wouldn't mind, some of your works. And maybe you can talk about the work itself and how that relates to the experience, how you experience or how you would like other people to experience it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know what you're going to pull up, but whenever you, let me see if I can get my, yes. So this was part of, this is called metaplagiarism. It was part of 3 pieces that should really be kind of viewed together, but obviously we can't do that, but the idea was, and it was created with a conceptual narrative, and the conceptual narrative was that the work of Murat Pak, which is a very well-known artist in the digital space, had a piece just like this called the Meta Bond. And what I did was take the Meta Bond and abstract it, basically. And it uses certain, 3D aesthetics to do that. But it was really just a question of where plagiarism sits within the space and kind of how it can be used. But this was created to be experienced as a hologram. So the reason you have a black setting is because it was meant to be just a raw channel that could then be transposed into hypervision format. And I worked with a great company that produce holograms through fan LEDs. And so that's how it should be experienced, right? And ideally really large format as well. So this is one way of looking at it, and it might appeal to some people that way, but that's not how I had envisioned it being experienced.
Okay, and if you wouldn't mind, we're just going to pull up the way that it can be experienced.
Well, that's a hologram. Yeah, that's exactly it.
I think this is beautiful. I love it. I think this is amazing.
Yeah, so that was at I'm trying to work out where that was. So it kind of did the rounds. So it and then cryptogeometry straight after that. Yeah, it kind of zoomed in. They cut the video there. But I think this is doing a bit of a tour. So this piece of work went to Contemporary Calgary with Andy Warhol for Look 2022 and Katie Lang, and then this was, I think, at a metaverse summit. So this was with Pierre Berge, which are a large auction house in France, kind of like a Christie's or Sotheby's, probably the third largest in the world. And they asked to take this to the metaverse summit for some discussion they were having in Paris, and then later at the Atelier Lumiere, which is where the Van Gogh projection experience was first conceived. And then this is then going to China on a bit of a China world tour, Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and a couple of other things. But that's the smallest way to experience it, that hologram, which is a single fan that you kind of see the lines spinning in the background, projected into a prism. But you can scale it modularly, with as many fans as you want. It can also be projected. So it can be projected hologram onto these flat, transparent LEDs. So these very large format LED transparent screens, which is some of the work that Dexamol, who's another of the Bloom Collective, has done recently in a collaboration with Grimes, and did a wonderful mech thing. But yeah, that's exactly it. That's how it should be experienced. Ideally in an installation setting, not on a table like that, but you have certain control with these things, and it's not perfect. I like the way it was exhibited at Contemporary CC, but yeah.
And so I don't want to take too much of your time. I think I just want to end on a very fun question. Maybe it's one of those unanswerable questions, like what's your favorite album? If you had, and this also links back to what I was just talking about, if you had unlimited resources, and not just talking about financial, I'm talking about in terms of anyone you wanted to collaborate with, anyone.
Goodness, yeah.
What would that look like? What would your vision be?
I mean, creatively or philanthropically or politically, or
like I said, I don't want to take too much of your time, but if you want to just do a little bit on both, if that interests you, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, philanthropically, I'd love to do there's a couple of causes that I think are quite dear to me. I think there's a lot of money that's put into cancer research, around finding cures, but I'd like to put more money into prevention. I don't think enough research has been done there, and I think that would be quite an interesting thing to do. Also, I've got orphans. The quality of life for orphans, and there's a lot of great people doing great work out there, and again, I don't think it gets quite as much attention, and I think that I'm very much a children of the future kind of thing, and I think that's important. So that's philanthropically. So I'd like to create ways to bring awareness, the kind of give the fisherman the rod, not the don't give them the fish, but yeah, creatively, collaboratively, yes. I mean, that's the dream, really. That's my lottery win dream. So you're quite right. The first part is myself, family, make sure everyone's organized, settled. Beyond that, because you're absolutely right, that is the most important thing. And then it becomes the philanthropy. That's the second most important thing. And then it's like, right, I've got all this money left over. So what do I do with it? And I'd love to create. I have huge artistic visions, right? That are very large scale, that require large teams, with different expertise. And it all comes down to whatever the theme is that I'm exploring at that time. And so it's about just all art for me is about a language and being able to communicate as effectively as you can. You work within certain constraints. You work within your technical ability. You work within how much you can get the work out to people, and so on and so forth. With those resources, I would mitigate a lot of that, right? So I'd be able to say, well, I'm not so great at this, but I'm going to get the right person that is, and I'm not great at having reach in these certain areas, but I'm going to pay for the marketing to make sure that it gets out there in front of them, and so on and so forth. And I'd probably host my own exhibitions, and I'd love to do some pretty wild experiential stuff. If I had the opportunity, but always something with a good way to end this, I guess, is to say that it really is about this idea of together to the top, as you said, taking people with you, So I'd also want to look at my peers and who I think is deserving, and there are many of them. I'm sure I wouldn't be able to help absolutely everybody, even with a lottery win. But I think there's a lot we could do to give people the opportunity that they seek. And I think that will ultimately enrich the arts altogether, in the same way that education can enrich innovation, So I think that's very important. So it's a huge question. I'm sure I could answer it much better with a bit of thought. I could talk to you for a whole hour about this.
All right. Well, it's been a great interview. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
No, you're welcome. You come back anytime. So we're gonna end it now, guys. You know what to do. All the viewers and listeners, like, comment, subscribe, turn on that notification bell. We're gonna put all the links in the description. The show notes, and how you can get to Icky's work and how you can contact him. So that's it, and we'll see you on the next episode, guys.